Ah, the great game. In the States, we didn't really get much of that, aside from the World Cup and some MLS. And I seem to be the only one in my family who takes interest when a Bundesliga or La Liga game comes on some TV in a bar or restaurant. But while footy may not be a popular game in a good chunk of the US, it has taken hold in other cultures throughout the world, and it looks like they're having a lot of fun with it. Speaking of fun, where is that mandatorily optional title card?
The story will continue after this.
Just a clarification, but Wikipedia directed me to the Russian subsection of Olfniks, and upon looking further into that, I was unable to find much on these beautiful Russian football hooligans. So instead I have decided to do the entire subculture since it wasn't listed on the big list. I'll probably double back on a lot of football subcultures covered here when the next World Cup comes around, but for now, here's an overlook on hooligan culture. Football, soccer, or the great game, however you want to call it, started in 19th century Europe. Now, one might argue that the Chinese game of Kuju, the Algonquin Pasukwakohoog, or Greek Episkiros are close predecessors, but FIFA considers the roots of association football to be in England. 1848, a lovely year when nothing interesting happened that would impact world history outside of one thing. The creation of Cambridge rules between Trinity, Eton, Winchester, Harrow, Rugby, and Shrewsbury universities. In the following decade, many clubs were formed and not connected to these schools, but they did follow some rules from Cambridge while introducing a few of their own. 1863 saw the creation of England's Football Association, the first governing body in the field of this sport. The Rugby Football Union was also a part of this association for a brief while before splitting off over the obscene rules of no running and holding the ball, and no kicking people in the shins. Rules for the game were being developed in Australia at the same time, but that became its own thing. The first game to be considered international was between Scotland and England in 1872. Through the 20th century, the sport was refined and forged in European cafes and South American plains to what we see today. A giant industry of men kicking things and faking getting hurt. And their fans? Well, I'll touch on them later. Let's just say that there's usually some hatred amongst them. Violence in sports is nothing new. One of the earliest recorded instances of outrage and violence because of the outcome of a sporting event were the Nika riots in 6th century Byzantium. What can be considered football hooliganism dates back to the 1880s, with the first recorded case coming from Preston in Lancashire. Compared to other FCs, Preston seemed to be the bad boys of the era, fighting fans of Queen's Park and Rail Station, beating players of Ashton Villa to unconsciousness, and even letting the elderly get in on it. In one of the funniest lines I've ever read, when in 1905, a 70-year-old woman joined in a drunken brawl against Blackburn fans. From the 20s to the 50s, there were sparse instances of violence and debauchery in the football world. It wasn't until the rise of violence in Latin American games from Barra Brava groups that media coverage on the topic increased. By the 60s, 25 incidents were reported each year, and the media did what they do best. They dubbed the violent incidents football hooliganism, and blew things out of proportion in a moral panic. A little anecdote from the 70s and 80s was that news crews in Britain were sent to football games more to film the crowd than the game itself. Nowadays, modern hooliganism is limited to pitch raiding, vandalism such as graffiti, arson, and destroying barriers, yelling mean things at anyone not in their colors, fighting those same people barefisted or with weapons, and in extreme cases, terrorism. It seems many of these hooligans are no longer interested in the game like their forefathers were, with many wearing the colors of their respective team and not attending the games, rather just committing a weird ritual of tribalism where they fight anyone not in their team's colors. British and Western European hooliganism seems to have stepped further away from the stadium in recent years, especially after two incidents in the 1980s.
I think these scenes that we're looking at, in fact, are a recording of the earlier problems. But as one does look at them, one cannot but feel that the time has come, indeed, if I can express a personal opinion, has long since passed, when we have to consider the majority. And if that means that we have to take some steps to prevent the minority coming abroad to drag the name of our country into the gutter, then we have to do it.
The darkest hour in UEFA history. A Heysel disaster took place in Brussels during the 1985 European Cup final, leading to the death of 39 people after fans of Liverpool FC charged and collapsed the gate, causing fans of Italian team Juventus to flee towards the separating wall, creating a human crush that eventually collapsed said wall. After the match, English teams were barred from all European competitions until 1990, and 14 Liverpool fans were convicted of manslaughter. Hillsborough was just as bad.
And the match is on with Liverpool in red, playing from...
Just a couple of minutes into the game, it became clear something was wrong behind the Liverpool goal. It seems initially police thought it was a pitch invasion. but soon people were collapsing on both sides of the fence.
During a 1989 game between Liverpool and Nottingham Forest, 2 standing-only sections were overfilled by security attempting to ease crowding into the entrance turnstiles. While not caused by hooligans, the resulting human crush led to the deaths of 94 people, 766 injuries, and 3 more eventual deaths. This tragedy led to the removal of standing-only sections from many and pitch fences from all British League stadiums, greatly reducing the space needed by large hooligan outfits. Both of these events severely limited hooligan actions in stadiums, with large British outfits like the Red Army and Intercity Firm being crushed under these reforms, and the addition of CCTV cameras throughout the nation. I don't know if that turned you off of stadium brawls like it did me, but if you're still wanting to see a good old stadium brawl, look no further than the Balkans, the former Soviet Union, Latin America, Sub-Saharan Africa, or even Scotland. And with all this Anglo-centric focus on hooliganism, who could forget the Barra Bravas from Latin America? Not me. No, I didn't edit this into the script because we made an error. Barra Brava groups, Spanish for fierce gang, are the Latin predecessor to the modern British hooligan. Coming from Argentina in the 50s, these fierce lads can be compared to American pep bands you see at college and high school sporting events. They'll sing and chant their support for their team, but may also have a side hustle. You see, Barra Bravas need to get money for their extravagant shows of passion somewhere, so many will turn to ticket scalping, theft, and a narcotics trade to get money together to help the whole group travel and pay for supplies. They've even been known to be recruited as agitators or security for political and social figures in the community, some even working as goon squads. They even have a Brazilian counterpart, the Torcida, who came about before they did in the 1930s. The Torcidas are the most musical of all others, singing songs or anthems at a supported team, and even a few that the whole crowd can get in on, no matter what's happening on the pitch. They also possess giant flags, or tifos, that show their support for a club, much larger than the striped banners used by the Barra Bravas. But the only things that distinguish them from the Barra Bravas, and even Ultras, are their continuous singing, and the ability not to single out players who are doing a bad job on the pitch. Although they have been known to chant the name of someone they want as a substitute. And if that wasn't enough, I still haven't talked about the Ultras. Another subculture of football fans, the Ultras are more of what you can call super fans. Yes, much like the kid in your chemistry class who can tell you all these specific details about each K-pop boy band member on her Ita bag, the Ultra cares an exorbitant amount about their team. The term comes from Italy, with supporters of AC Milan forming Fossa dei Leoni in 1968, and the term itself coming from fans of a different team in 1951. However, the first Ultra group can be traced back to HNK Hajduk Split back in the 1950s. More specifically, Torcida Split, a fan group created after the 1950 World Cup in Brazil, and you can see where they got their name from. Almost all subgroups of football fans, aside from outright hooligans, have some kind of tifo. But the Ultras see it as an art. They will take an important moment, mascot, or figure, and paint it on giant cards or banners, unfurling it during the game to show their unquestionable support for a team and sport they love so dear. Ultras are not as violent, with only the rare story of an Ultra group fighting another making headlines. They are, however, political and commercial. Ultra groups, much like the Barra Bravas, will sell merchandise for their team, but they will also charge membership subscriptions to their fellow Ultras. They are the more organized of the European football subcultures, usually with 1 or 2 middle-aged men who see it more as a full-time job. Think your Uncle Fabrizio, who used to work as a bike mechanic until his arm went bad. Now he's helping FC Lazio through getting some 20-somethings to give him money for tickets and craft materials. There's also the casuals. I'm not going to say anything else about them aside from that fact. And for all our sanity, here's a nice little chart that has the differences between the 4. Alright, now that I gave you more than enough time to study this, we're having a quiz. Put your phones away and make sure you have a pencil. You have 15 seconds, answer as many as you can. Many hooligans do what they do out of support and love for their own team. Kind of a tribalistic viewpoint of we're better because I am part of this group. They see other people, be it a rival team or just someone wearing different colors, as the enemy, and the enemy isn't welcome around here. This whole idea traces itself back to tribalistic tendencies almost all of humanity has, and it's the reason we seek out people who share some of the same demographics with us. These would be security and belonging for those of you following along at home with your Maslow pyramids. But there is an underlying sense of tribalism in every subculture. What makes sports ones different? That would be a few of the other ideas and examples we have, and since they fall under criticism, I'm going to use this as a segue. Mob violence is nothing new. It's been around for as long as people have convened in one location to say, I hate this one guy, let's run him out of town. But the obvious difference of hooliganism is that they don't work as a small mob. No, they work as a second team to the actual folks on the field. Albeit, where the first group work as a team to get a ball somewhere, the second work as a unified mass to destroy anything in their way because the first group either failed badly or won greatly. A sort of groupthink or hive mind you see with large crowds, even if there is no malice behind some forming. Crowd psychologist Gustave Le Bon has a lot of interesting stuff on this subject, such as groupthink. Groupthink is one such idea used by psychologists to describe the hive mind that is large crowds. Something that is greatly applicable to hooligan groups as well. They work as a whole unit, knowing only that their objective is to humiliate or defeat any opponents to their crew. It's also part of human nature, with tribalism playing a part as these mobs of hooligans wander the streets looking for anyone who isn't in that group already. From a historical standpoint, it's what happened during the rise of the Nazis. Speaking of which, there are some neo-Nazi sentiments in some hooligan and ultra groups, while many hooligan movements did have ties of skinheads in the 60s and 70s. The good news for the hooligans of England is that they worked more with the skinheads who just liked the feel of a shaved head and not the Fourth Reich or anything. A lot of modern hooligan and extremely ultra factions have what can be considered extremely right-wing ideologies, even if a handful of members disagree with them, but they don't do it alone. Like we briefly covered in an overview of hooliganism itself, a lot of teams usually have fans who form unofficial gangs. Groups for teams like these guys, Spartak Moscow,
Спартак, Москва, ты моя судьба, за тебя, родной, хоть в огонь, хоть в бой.
the Lie Ultras for Red Star Belgrade, and even the lovely Billy Boys of Rangers FC, who politely introduce themselves before deciding to beat an Irish-blooded man like myself to death. A lot of these hooligan groups can be seen as gangs, but only around game time. Aside from the occasional Chav, Gopnik, or equivalent being more of a violent ultra, they are usually stronger in numbers. As such, police forces have taken countermeasures in many countries to limit the effects hooligans have on the general public. But it would seem that hooliganism in general is on the way out, and while I would like to say that it's sad a lot of people are losing British World Star, it's a welcome thing. For while one can be a fan, enjoying a game of moving a ball with such grace and beauty, there always existed a small underbelly of violence with the sport, not just on the field. Hooligans are a part of football culture, and sometimes even a welcome one for the working class youths who want to let off some steam. But we may see the end of them with more security measures at stadiums, so while you can still see the occasional drunken brawl, it will not be on the level of a hooligan riot. Alright, I think I have that TV working. Let's watch some footy.
Спартак, Москва, ты моя судьба, за тебя, родной, хоть в огонь, хоть в бой. За тебя, Спартак, я порву врага, оппонентам всем отшибу рога. Верю в Спартак, верю в красно-белый флаг, я уверен, что у нас будет все ништяк. Верю в Спартак, верю в красно-белый флаг, я уверен, что у нас будет все ништяк.